Welcome everybody to our webinar here on non-traditional contracting strategies. I've got myself here and Angela Webb with me here today. So Angela, first off, welcome to this. I am excited to hear about our topic today because I know I'm going to learn a lot. So I'm probably going to ask a lot of very government contracting 101 type questions on this. And so we're going to get going. And as we get going, I'm going to encourage people, if you have questions, instead of putting them in the chat, I would recommend you put them in the Q&A. It'll be much easier for us to manage the Q&A as we do this. We're also recording this for our podcast. So we're doing this live, but we're recording it for the podcast Game Changers for Government Contractors. So you'll be able to come back and listen there. I think we'll also be putting it somewhere out on the SGA or SGP website at some point. So we'll have that out there as well. So Angela, before we get started and talking about our topic for the day, I would love for you to introduce yourself to everybody with a little bit of background and tell us about your new role with Strategic Growth Partners.
Yes, great. So thank you so much for having me this morning, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. My first time chatting with you, so super excited to get this information out to all of the viewers and listeners today and in the future podcast. So I originally had a woman-owned small business, and I have now merged that via an acquisition into the SGP, Strategic Growth Partners organization, where I'll be running what we're calling the GXC, Government Accelerator or GovCon Accelerator. A lot of what we're going to be doing is focused on non-traditional government contracts, as well as state and local contracting for those that are primarily in the federal space and looking to make a transition into the state and local side of the house. And then we'll also be supporting additional small business requirements or needs like certifications, as well as traditional contracting support.
That is awesome. And forgive us, we have like a lot of the people on teams that keep beeping in all the late arrivals here, but we're a little over 156 people showing up today. So I'm excited for all the people that are in here today. Tell us a little bit about how you wound up specializing in non-traditional contracting.
Sure. So when we started the company, we were primarily focused on technology, and that was small business technology. So working with small companies that were either in the commercial space or not in contracting in any way, shape, or form, and just kind of invented or came by a product or service that they wanted to bring into the federal space. And so with those types of products and services, there are government requirements, as everyone knows, especially in the Department of Defense and Homeland Security segment, as it's related to national security, that sort of disqualify those small businesses from the get-go because they don't have FEDRAMP or they're not FSMA compliant, they don't meet all the NIST criteria, et cetera. And so we had to get really inventive and creative about the way we got to market. And so that's kind of how we got into the non-traditional contracting rules and regulations. And from there, we just became experts because it's what we were doing constantly for the last 3 years.
Nice, nice. You know, one of the things that I've learned through my time in government contracting is just because we as a contractor know something, that doesn't mean a contracting officer knows it. I still run into contracting officers all the time that when I talk to them about CMMC or something else, they're like, what are you talking about? So there's a lot of things that don't filter into that community because they are working so hard to do their job. They're not learning about all these little things. And so from whether it's a contracting vehicle or one of these different strategies, I can see how part of our job is just educating contracting officers. So what should we assume that contracting officers do know about these strategies?
I would err on the side of caution and assume they know nothing. I would be ahead of the curve. And I would come in not just with my capability statement, but I would come in with a one pager or a semblance of information that identifies ways they can contract with you, especially as a small business or a business in a small business designation. So I would make sure you have that information prepared to discuss with them and make yourself as much of an expert as possible, because the chances of them asking questions and coming to you for follow-on discussion is pretty high in those cases.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, one of the things that I saw that I'm pretty sure it was your booth at the strategic growth booth probably 2 years ago at the 8A conference that I'd never seen anywhere before that I thought was brilliant was around working with 8As and then working with tribes. It was a one pager and it was like, what is this? How does it work? How can we use this? And I thought that was brilliant to be able to put that in the hands of a contracting officer versus what I've seen government contractors do in the past is just say, look in the FAR and look here and kind of try to cram it down their throat versus,
Right.
hey, here's what it is. Here's a practical way to use it. Here's all you have to do. And I thought that was a really good way to educate, or like a really soft way to
Mhm.
do that. Do you have recommendations on putting together things like that? Or are there things like that that you would give a client to help educate contracting officers?
Yeah, so both. And first of all, I'll say, even before I joined SGP, I was always so impressed with the level of marketing support that they give all their clients. It is so hard to determine the level of information to share with members of the contracting organization, whether it's DoD, commercial. You're talking to someone who, as you mentioned, is overloaded on a day-to-day basis with information, requirements, and compliance concerns. So coming in with that information at that level, whether it's a half a page or a one pager, and knowing strategically what to share that fits for you. So
Mhm.
side note, identify what fits for you first, right? And make sure that you're
Yeah.
not saying we can do everything, which I think is the death of the small business, unfortunately, for those of us that are just starting out. It's really imperative. And so SGP continues to support those marketing efforts, tribal clients and commercial clients, small and large businesses, to ensure they're armed with that information for those contracting organizations. We also can, through consulting, provide additional information if small businesses and organizations would like to do that themselves.
That's awesome. So let's kind of get in the heart of the topic here and maybe unpack a little bit what some of these are, because people hear non-traditional contracting and they're like, what does that mean? And for a lot of folks, the term OTA has come up a lot recently, but there's OTA and CSO and SBIRs and all these different things.
Mhm.
Can you just help people understand what some of those are and maybe when they're to be used?
Sure. So traditional contracting is your FAR-based contracting. So FAR rules and regulations, all of them apply. Examples would be IDIQs, GWACs, direct awards under FAR rules and regulations. There's a few other there's that I'm not naming necessarily, but that kind of gives you an idea of traditional. Non-traditional is contracting that has different types of solicitation methodologies that do not necessarily come under all of the FAR rules and regulations. And examples of non-traditional contracting are BAAs, broad agency announcements, CSO, commercial solution openings, openings. I always get that wrong. I always want to say offerings. And then OTAs, other transaction authority. But OTAs are different than BAAs and CSOs. So broad agency announcements are solicitation types. They're governed by FAR Part 35.016. They are a competitive procedure and they're focused on basic and applied research. So a traditional contract will come out with a scope of work and it will be pretty specific on what the government's asking you to do. You know, contractor shall provide this, this, and this, right? And then your response then meets all of those requirements, or should in theory. And there's a set of evaluation criteria that is aligned to that. For a broad agency announcement, there will be multiple areas of interest. There could be 10, there could be 20. They could be everything from logistics and supply chain to AI. There could also be things around infrastructure from a physical security perspective or construction perspective. And under those areas of interest, the requirements are very loosely written in terms of what the government's looking for. They're looking for innovation. They're looking for a new product or service they've never seen, that industry's never proposed to them. And your response will be an individual use case. So even though technically it is a competitive environment, your use case is most likely going to be different than all of the other teams that are responding to that. And an award for that can be a grant, a contract, a cooperative agreement, or a direct contract award. And that will be written the way that the statement of work is written through that evaluation process and award process.
So how, like, I know OTAs are really a buzz right now. How does a contractor position that with a contracting officer? You know,
So,
since it's so different.
yeah, and that's a great question. So the BAAs are not OTAs. So BAAs are individual solicitation or competitive procedure types.
Mhm.
As well as CSOs. They are also individual solicitation types. And so let's talk about those really quick, and then we'll jump into OTAs because OTAs are a little bit more complex. So commercial solution offerings, they are also a procurement method. They are FAR-based as well, but they have derivatives of FAR requirements. So I like to call those FAR flexible. They're also for innovative and forward-thinking types of work, and they can also be grants, cooperative agreements, or direct award contracts. They also can be awarded as OTAs. So that kind of helps us segue into the OTA field. But CSOs and BAAs are their own standalone solicitation procedures. Okay, so OTAs, like you said, it's the buzzword everyone wants to know. They are other transaction authority. OTA rights are given by Congress. I believe it is 10 USC 4021 and 4022 that gives the power to that agency. One is for prototyping and one is for research and development or research and design. And so not every single agency has OTA authority, but many do. And so the awards that they give out are specific to the requirements they have. They are not FAR-based. There is no portion of the FAR that aligns to an OTA unless that agency, upon award, decides to incorporate FAR clauses in that direct award. I'll stop and see if you have any questions there. I know it's a mouthful.
I think for a lot of folks, they hear the buzzword. So let's back up for a moment and say, why is there such a buzz right now around OTAs? And then maybe we'll get into some questions around it.
Sure. So an executive order came out not too long ago that really focused on transitioning away from FAR-based contracting when it's able to be done, when it's applicable, finding innovative pathways to get to market. And so in that rush of agencies to utilize that, because it certainly cuts down on the paperwork and the requirements for them, they've put out a lot. So we've seen, I know there's more than 36 BAAs and CSOs out right now, and at least 20 OTAs. And so the government's actively using these solicitation methods to support quicker awards, quicker turnaround times on evaluation. With that, we're also seeing a very interesting and what I think is very, small business supportive, the way or procedures that they're using to request the solicitation responses. So they'll start with a white paper, a concept paper, or research paper. You can put that in front of them. They'll review it and they come back to you and let you know if it's something that they're interested in funding or if they're going to pass on it. So for small businesses that don't have the time and resources to support full-fledged response efforts for every single OTA or agency, we're seeing them be a little more conscientious of that.
I guess one thing that people are probably curious about if they're on here listening today is who is this for and who is it not? So I'm a technology company, but what if I sell, plumbing parts? I think that's one of the first questions because they hear OTAs, it's the new thing, it's a buzzword. I got to go get this, but it may not be for you. So who's it for? Who's it not for?
Well, it's certainly for technology companies that we know. Prototyping any type of new equipment, any structure, construction companies, organizations that perform research. So from a healthcare perspective, there's tons of companies that fit under that category. If you are a non-traditional federal contractor, that's really what these solicitations are geared towards. That doesn't mean that large traditional contractors can't participate. They certainly can, but they have to work with small non-traditional contracting companies to be able to receive those types of awards. And they have to significantly reduce their pricing in many cases, depending on the requirements in those solicitations.
Yeah. So let's switch for a minute and talk SBIRs. That's another one it's been around for such a long time. And it is one where people think, I can go win some SBIRs and get rich doing this, which I actually have a really good friend of mine and a client who he actually did. He actually used SBIRs to grow his first company and then he sold it. Then he used SBIRs to grow his second company and sold it. And now he's in the middle of using SBIRs to grow a third company to eventually sell it. So, he's using that. But explain a little bit more specifically about what SBIRs are, like the phases, if you will, and again, who's that for and who it's not?
Yeah, so SBIRs are for small businesses. It's in the name, Small Business Innovation Research. So there's opportunities there to partner in phase 2. Well, actually, let me take a step back. So there's multiple phases in the SBIR. There's phase 1, which I believe is up to $250,000. There may be some changes there and individual agencies may increase in a phase 1, but that's the standard award ceiling. Phase 1 is around, I have an idea or I have a product that I can can change for the government to end in X and whatever that product or solution is. Phase 1 can be 6 to 12 months. And then phase 2. So you have to reapply for phase 2 typically, unless the SBI rules and regulations say it is a quick to phase 2 or direct to phase 2 award. Phase 2 can be usually 12 to 18 months. It is 1.2 million, sometimes a little bit higher in awards. In phase 2, you can have a large business support you, and they can do, gosh, I want to say it's up to 30% for most of the agencies of that work, but the rest has to be performed by a small business. And then phase 3 is commercialization. And that's typically 6-12 months for most companies that respond to those solicitations. And that's where you take what you've done in phase 2. So phase 1 was the idea. Phase 2, we've created the prototype and it's working. It's rolling it out across the government and in the commercial sector to monetize it. I was just going to say, in many cases, small businesses don't use large government contractors to support them in that phase 2 because it eats away, obviously, at the award dollars. But it's not discouraged in any way.
Yeah, nice. You mentioned a little bit about an executive order earlier. We've seen a huge emphasis from this administration on emerging technologies, AI in particular, things like that. Do you have some recommendations on how companies can use that momentum to get in the door with some of these non-traditional opportunities?
Well, AI in general is plastered across every single non-traditional contract opportunity that's out there. And let me note, so you can find most of the non-traditional contract opportunities on sam.gov. So super easy to find them. Usually a keyword search will get you what you're looking for. And that can get you started on finding the opportunities. But again, they have multiple areas of interest. So you have to make sure that you're identifying the best place for you to respond. And note also that if you respond to an area of interest and the government comes back and says, hey, we're not interested in funding this topic, don't be afraid to go back to the drawing board, make some tweaks and reapply potentially to that same area of interest or a different area of interest under that contract. So I hate to say don't take no for an answer from the government, but in this case, I think it's okay for you to reapply and resubmit. And then another quick note, especially for small businesses in terms of maximizing your resources and your capabilities and efforts, a lot of the white papers that you write, if you keep the same use case, if there's applicability across more than one area of interest on more than one traditional contract, you can rinse and repeat until you get approval to then go into that full proposal contracting phase.
So can you talk a little bit about like what a bit of a timeline looks like when you're working on this? Because when you're talking small business, which a lot of people are small business that are approaching this, when you're talking small business, you don't have a huge window of time to go and get contracts and things. And, that's why even in the traditional FAR-based, I'm going to go bid on something on SAM, you're hoping to win sooner than later and start receiving money sooner than later in this. That time frame is often 90 to 120 days at best for a lot of folks, and they don't realize that because from the time you see something on SAM to the time it gets awarded to the time you actually start work, the time you get your first invoice paid can be 90 days to 120 days. It just depends. And then you've got, your contracts that come out and you think they're going to award them and it takes 6 months to award them and things like that. So it's not all cut and dry on that. But when you're looking at these non-traditional means, what does the lead time look like on I've submitted something, I've heard back, and now we're actually making money on this thing?
So my personal experience is, and this is just generalizing across all of the non-traditional contracts across all of the agencies that we have worked with and seen. Typically, if you submit your white paper, your concept paper, which is your 5-pager, you're hearing back within 30 to 60 days. So they're identifying pretty quickly, hey, we don't want this, or hey, let's move you into the proposal segment of this solicitation. So that's happening fairly quickly. When you are submitting the full proposal, we are seeing between 90 and 120 days in most cases for most agencies to give you that negotiation and full award. Now, after award for you to start, that just depends on what your phase 1 implementation for research and development or prototyping looks like. So that'll be discussed with the agency in your evaluation, during that awarding process, but it can kick off quickly. It could be within 30 days, or it could be, the longer 90, 120 day start time. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer there. But I
No.
will say, as you review these solicitations, they are very clear. And I give the government so much credit for this, especially the Department of Defense, the Army, and the Navy, especially. They are identifying, hey, we're getting back to you in this window. We're letting you know in this window, this is our plan. This is how we're going to award. They're very kind of concise in that, in their methods.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's actually a great answer because I think when I'm thinking about this, that doesn't sound like too long of a time frame when most of these are not as competitive as another solicitation. So like a lot of people are applying, they're choosing things, they're choosing it based on your criteria, basically, like your write-up, and you're not competing 30 people with the exact same write-up. So
Correct.
it's a very different mode of competition, if you will, than the traditional, hey, I'm going to compete against 30 or 40 small businesses, or in some cases, 200 small businesses going after an opportunity. Very different. So I like the approach from this. So if you are a small business today joining the market and you are looking at traditional and non-traditional, do you have some advice for folks about like how their pipeline should look? You know, it's like, should you be chasing a good chunk of traditional stuff with maybe a portion of this? So maybe it's like an 80-20 type of mix in your pipeline. Do you think there's enough opportunity in this where maybe your business strategy focuses more on these types? And I know, again, that determines on, well, what type of business is it? Are they brand new? Or they have something innovative? Or they have something they can sell? Assume the company can do both. How would you spend your time?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And you're right, it is very individualized for the organization and what they're selling. But the best advice I can give is if you're a technology firm, you should be doing 50-50. You should be finding partners in the traditional contracting space to either resell your technology to, so that you can kind of pull your efforts back and focus full force from a direct to market perspective on the non-traditional contracting, or split it 50-50 if you have the resources to do that in terms of internal response times and teaming arrangements. But I would highly suggest finding a large or mid-sized prime that can support you and taking you into the marketplace so you can shift more of your internal writing and pricing efforts around the go-to-market on the non-traditional. From a non-technology perspective, you know, that's a tough one. I think construction-wise, we're still seeing a lot of really good high dollar value traditional contracts on the street. We're seeing, I would say, probably 10 to 15% of non-traditional contracts that address construction and other infrastructure related non-technology offerings. So I would probably just create a new pipeline for non-traditional efforts and try to work with a company, you know, selfishly like ours or another to help you build that out and really focus on where you fit. Again, I think partnering is key. Even in the non-traditional space, you want to make sure that you're bringing something to the table that you're great at, but you don't want to say you can do everything. Again, the downfall of the small business. I'm not the professional that can do every single thing that's in the solicitation or use case. Non-traditional is a little different because you're building the use case, but bringing in other small business partners, I think, really adds value to what you're taking to the agency.
Yeah, that's awesome. As we start to kind of close up today, because I want to save time for questions because we have a lot of questions in here. Is there anything I'm sure we've missed, but is there anything we've missed that you want to make sure we cover before we transition into questions?
Yes. So OTAs work through consortiums. For those of you that are not aware, you can kind of, I think even at this point, Google a list of government contracting consortiums, and you'll start to see some repetitive information there that should get you started. There are multiple types of consortiums. Some are industry-based, where the government awards the ability to publish responses and solicitations for OTAs through them, through that third-party company or nonprofit organization. Those types of consortiums will cost you money, most likely, to join, and you'll become a member and you'll get access to information and solicitations ahead of non-members. In other instances, the consortiums like AFWorks and SoftWorks, those are related to the agencies. And so the agencies manage more, even though they partner with nonprofits and industry, for-profit industry as well, they manage more of those efforts. And so they're free. So my advice would be to start with AppWorks and SoftWorks and some of the
Yeah.
other free consortiums to get your feet wet. Those consortiums are dedicated for that agency to get their information to market, to collectively look across industry, small and large, and determine what efforts are being done from a commercial perspective that the government can use to advance and innovate. So join their webinars, jump on their blogs, look at their websites, and participate as much as you can. A lot of times the agencies themselves are participating in those chats and those webinars and those discussions. And so you can get your name out there and you can get yourself seen slowly. They also have events that you can attend in person. So I think that's the last kind of piece of imperative information.
No, that was good. I'm glad you covered that. So as we wrap up here today, again, we're going to go into Q&A and try to get to all the questions that you have. But if this webinar resonated with you and this is something you would like to know more about, because look, there's a lot of information on this. We got about 30 to 45 minutes to give you as much as we can, and then with Q&A. So there's no way we could possibly cover everything, right? We could just give you kind of whet your appetite a little bit. So if people heard this, they liked it, they want to know more, are there some resources you would suggest or things that you can email attendees afterwards?
Sure. So we have an internal presentation that outlines the difference between BAAs and CSOs and OTAs, and it kind of gives you the ability to make a one-pager or work with us to create one specific for you as a business, as an organization in the public sector, I should say. So certainly we'll happy to send that out after and offer additional support there. Obviously, Strategic Growth Partners, it's a powerhouse in terms of the back office support that it offers for clients, big and small, tribal and commercial based clients, technology and non. And so I would highly suggest getting on the website, looking through some of the information and offerings that we have. I mean, I joined this team because not only do I think it's fantastic from an outside perspective, I've seen firsthand the ability of this organization to change small businesses and their landscape in government contracting. So please reach out to us. We're happy to help. And if we can't, or you don't think you're a fit for us, we're happy to support pushing you in a different direction and offering you additional resources where we can.
Awesome. Yeah, that's one of the things I've really liked about SGP is, I've worked with you guys for a couple of years now on different things, and just the giving attitude, basically, to kind of point in the right direction, whether it benefits you or not. And I think there's not a lot of us in the market that do that. We're one of those organizations too, of like, hey, I can't help you, but Angela can, so why don't you go work with her and her team? And we're definitely good at that stuff. So thank you for that. Email or people will get emailed out the cheat sheet presentation, whatever that is, afterwards. And if they want any more information, they can just go to the website and reach out to either you or somebody on the team directly for that. So that's awesome. Look, let's go into the questions here. And I was just kind of scrolling through here. I hit the bottom and I saw one from Lori, who attends our live session. We were talking about the live sessions earlier. She attends our live session almost every morning. So Lori, that got your question bumped to the top by just being nosy about that. She's in the UK, I believe. And so we've got an international presence here today with us. So
that's great.
Her question is about an FCL is a big barrier. Any advice there?
Facilities clearance, I'm assuming that's what she's talking about. So partnering. It's going to be obviously hard to get that first contract. If you partner, you can get issued a DD 254 as a subcontractor to support work through your prime contractor. That's the biggest advice I can give you, is find a well-established traditional defense or homeland security contractor that you can, for lack of a better way to say it, hitch your wagon to. And I'm happy to talk more about that. If you have her information, I'm happy to follow up and look at her capabilities and offerings and try to kind of point her in the right direction.
Awesome. Yeah. And us too, we have folks that if you can, do a swap, they're more than happy to do that. And depending on what agencies you're working with, we have a handful of clients that are open to that as well. So a lot of times the fastest way is you put somebody on one of your contracts, and then they put you on one of theirs, and now you're off to the races much faster. I mean, that's the short way. There's a long way to do it. I'll throw out one more that most people aren't aware of. Occasionally, not all the time, I believe it's NRO. If you watch their solicitations, they have a solicitation they've done a couple of times now where they just put it out and say, anyone who responds, whether you win or not, we will sponsor you because we need more cleared folks.
Wow, that's
And
amazing.
it's happened a couple of times. So it may not be open at the moment, but I have seen that from NRO. So that's pretty awesome. We have somebody asking, are you hearing anything? Oh, he's going to go get specific on us. Anything about GSA IP3 GWAC? Or will they have it created and open for business?
Unfortunately, I have not heard anything. I also have not necessarily had my ear to the ground on the GSA efforts. We've been primarily for the last quarter, especially in the DoD and Homeland Security segment. So non-traditional side, I have not, but happy to follow up if I do hear something.
Amanda says, I'm an 8A ANC. Do you suggest that we put together an explanation of what an ANC is? I assume for contracting officers.
Yes. I mean, err on the side of more in this case. Make sure that you always give them that additional information. I definitely would. And honestly, in a one pager, I would split that page. I would have half of it be about what is an ANC, and then the other half, how can you get to us? And you kind of explain that sole source side as well as the non-traditional contracting side, because that's certainly a second avenue for ANCs to take advantage of.
Yeah. Somebody put in the chat, CTMA is another great option as non-traditional. That's about all I put in there.
A little bit more. Yeah, I don't know the acronym.
I don't know that one either. Such a variety of consortia out there. What consideration should a company be considering other than looking at the tech types supported when determining which ones they should target?
That is a great question. Okay, so if you go to an agency website, there's typically a link that tells you what types of consortiums they typically have. So for example, the Navy, gosh, the Navy has more than I can count. And so they have one specific to nuclear purposes, they have undersea, they have aerospace, right? So there's one specifically for what you're looking to get into. I will say you have to be careful, unfortunately, because you're going to spread yourself really thin if you try to join multiple ones. There's a lot of information coming out and events and opportunities to discuss and blog, etc. So fine tune to this gentleman or lady's point that put that note in there. Fine tune what works for you. Make sure you're joining the ones that are specific to the areas where you think you can add value.
Nice. Larry's asking lots of acronyms out there. Quick definition of OTA, FAR, and others would be helpful. Larry, I think we'll just have that in the presentation. So when that gets sent out, otherwise I think we've kind of covered it a few times, but let's see, 10 USC 4023 is another opportunity for direct award, but has special considerations. They're very limited contracting officer. This really wasn't a question. That's just John pointing something out. Could you please provide a clear idea of what keywords to use in order to find non-traditional contract opportunities on SAM?
Sure. So BAA, if you just type in BAA, you have to filter through them. I think I did it yesterday just to make sure things were still coming back up. Certainly didn't want to lead anybody in the wrong direction. So I did that and I pulled up 16 just off of the BAA search title. CSO as well should come up, but you can type in broad agency announcement. You can type in the specific agency that you're looking for or put that in the selection criteria on the left side of the screen. And then you can kind of filter through everything they have. Some of them, to your point, will not say BAA or CSO, but there'll be a large title in terms of the solution that's requested. So it may, like I think Air Force has one out called Air Dominance. Right. And so when you see things like that, that's such a broad, right? You're seeing that and going, oh my gosh, what the heck is that? Or AFTAC, I think, is another one that they have open. So when you see those big kind of generalizations in the title with no specific scope information or sub-agency title or anything, those are a pretty good key indicator from my personal experience. So click on those and read through, and you should see some documents in those that give you the RFP, any amendments, and then usually they'll even provide you templates for you to respond with, which is great.
That's awesome. Leslie asks, can you also speak to price challenges and how they fit in non-traditional contracting?
Yes. Okay. So pricing is tricky with non-traditional contracting because...
hang on. It said price challenges.
Say that one more time.
It's price challenges?
Price challenges.
Yeah. I think every now and then they'll put out some sort of challenge where you win a prize or something like that.
Okay.
But I would like you to talk about pricing, though. You brought up a really good one. So there's two questions in one here.
Okay. Can you reread the prize challenge piece?
Yeah. It says, can you also speak to prize challenges and how they fit in these non-traditional contracting methods?
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So prize challenges can come out through the OTAs, or they can come out directly from the agency. And just a quick note, some OTAs are published on SAM.gov. Some are not. So you have to double your efforts, SAM.gov and whatever consortium you're looking to be a part of, because it'll be in one or both places. So prize challenges come out either way. They're typically specific, even though they're non-traditional, they're typically very specific in the request for whatever the solution is, whether it's a product or a service. They'll give you a challenge. They'll say, hey, we have this issue. Army Applications Lab has done several, I think, over the last 2 years, and others. And your goal is to respond with a solution that meets that specific challenge. That is a little bit more competitive because you're all given the same information to respond to, whereas in BAAs, CSOs, there's less information around the scope and more around the issue. So you have a little bit more leniency in your response. Those, again, are a little bit more specific. I think DoD even had organized effort where they had several of those prize type called Shark Tank at one point. I don't know if they still do that. And it mimicked the actual Shark Tank shows. So it was really interesting to watch and see. But yeah, those are a little bit more competitive. I would be very specific about what you're bringing to the market. Those you typically don't want to partner because you want your technology or your product or service to be front and center. So yeah, just heavily technical in terms of writing. Hopefully that's helpful.
Awesome. No, that's helpful. Since they brought up that, talk a little bit about pricing. You were starting to talk about how pricing is a bit tricky in this. So tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll go into the rest of it.
Yeah, so we talked about traditional contracting, and we have this firm scope. You will provide X, Y, and Z. So when you look to price that, you're saying, oh, okay, we know what the market charges for these. We know what industry has provided to government previously, and this is around that price point. And so you typically stay within that frame of reference. And the non-traditional side, again, the structure is very loosely written in many cases, and the scope is much more gray. And so when you're responding, even though your use case may be tacked down in terms of functionality and, specifically what you're giving the government, finding a price point for something that's never been pitched before is a challenge. I highly suggest everyone use the free tools available to all contractors, the Fed spending tools, and search for something similar, and also use the GSA labor rate tool to look for labor rates across hundreds of categories at this point. And use both of those tools to really fine tune what your pricing looks like so that you can write a justification with those references showing we put in the effort, we did the research, we know you've paid X amount for this specific thing, we're a little bit different, so we've added on this cost, and we use the GSA labor rates. It just makes the process much more smooth from my experience.
Nicholas asked, what is the difference between SBIR and STTR as they relate to small businesses?
So SBIRs are small businesses. You do not have to have a research partner. STTRs, you do have to have a research partner. And that research partner, for example, one of the organizations that we support as a client is a company called Immertech, and they have a research partner at Camels, which is a research organization within the University of South Florida. So you have to find a research partner. So any school or research organization.
Richard asks, thanks for the info. Can you talk about the recent talk at GSA about allowing agencies more freedom or ways for them to use deviations?
So I did not firsthand hear the conversation. I've read a lot of publications around the follow-up there. I think GSA, just my personal opinion, I think they are really leaning in to making things easier for small businesses and mid-sized companies. I think all agencies are doing that. And I think the non-traditional route is the way that you're starting to see them do that. GSA, I haven't seen any non-traditional contracts come out from them yet, but I have seen some of their efforts around consolidation and the opportunities they've taken to lean in and manage some of the contracts a little bit differently or less stringently. But that would be the extent which I would feel comfortable discussing it without having a firsthand conversation with GSA and reading a little bit more information about their moves.
Yeah, awesome. Jimmy asked, do you have any upcoming SBIR specific webinars where you do more of a deep dive on the SBIR phase 3?
We don't, but I'm happy to consider doing that with the team. I think we have a lot of knowledge we can support. And Michael, you said your friend's been through them. Maybe we could grab him and have him jump in
and chat. Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah, I mean, he just keeps using those to build technology and sell a company. So it's awesome. Are traditional IT resellers going to have challenges with a Microsoft being able to sell directly using these same OTAs? So one of the things that people may not be aware of is the new OneGov strategy, and that's kind of what Jeff is talking about here, where the government is going to be doing a lot of direct business, and it's going to be eliminating what I would consider the middleman, not necessarily the VARs. So there's a difference between being a VAR and a reseller. And so that's definitely going to impact those resellers. But to just reiterate Jeff's question, are traditional IT resellers going to have a challenge with Microsoft being able to sell directly using these same OTAs?
Again, I'm not an expert on that side of the house, so I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable answering that right now. I'm happy to do some follow on and reach back out. If we can grab that person's name and information, I can do a follow up with them.
Yep. Yeah, just understand the OneGov strategy is fairly new, but as OneGov rolls out, you're going to see some people that were just selling licenses go away. I can see that happening. So it's good to know what to do. What advice do you have for those new to this topic about what not to do in pursuing these classes of opportunities? Really good question.
That's a good question. What not to do?
Yeah,
I would say maybe don't use it as a shortcut, because you still want to put the time, effort into the full solicitation or even just the white paper. So don't take for granted that the government is giving you an opportunity to submit 5 pages of information, which all of us are shocked by, right? Because we're so used to these, in some cases, even hundreds of pages of RFP responses. Don't take that for granted. You are still expected to come in the door with technical information about your product and or service. You are still expected to offer them a solution at a reasonable price that's justified. And you have the responsibility to make that sale based on what you're saying you can do. So be methodical, think everything through, make sure you're looking at a phased delivery approach, make sure you're giving them milestones and metrics, and what you're offering can be solidified when delivered.
Awesome. Shannon asks, let's see, are there any opportunities for education, service organizations, or grant writing research in this setting?
Can you say that one more time just to make sure I understand the question?
Yeah, that was a mouthful. So I'll repeat that one. So, are there any opportunities for education, service organizations, so education-based companies, or grant writing research in this setting?
I don't know about grant writing research, but I can circle back on that. I can look into that a little more. Education type companies, yes, there is education and training efforts across at least 10 BAAs that are open right now that I've personally seen. And you may have to tweak what you're going to market with, right, to meet the requirements. And again, find a partner, phone a friend, and bring them to the table. If you're an education company, put together a solution. If you have a platform, find someone that develops the content. If you have the platform or the content, find someone that actually goes out to the areas and does the training. So put together a solution, right? Make sure that you're meeting all of the problem or pain points of the government through that. The other thing I always say is bring your own tech. So if you're not a tech company, just make sure you have someone on deck that you can always pull in to write to some of these requirements or to meet those pain points from the technical side of the house, because a lot of what we're seeing, even in those non-traditional, non-technical opportunities, there's still room to bring in a tech partner to kind of add value and push you over that threshold from a valuation perspective.
See, are there any limits to price funding in OTAs, maybe on the lines of how they have in SBIRs?
Yes. So usually they'll say not to exceed a dollar value for the overall solicitation. They vary. Some can be 5 million, some can be 10 million, but they vary. They certainly aren't $100 million contracts from my experience, but they definitely, especially for small businesses, are a good option in terms of getting quicker funding and above that SBIR value. Anything that we haven't covered? Gosh, I'm trying to think.
We've covered a lot.
We've covered a lot. Yeah. I mean, I think there's always room for follow-up, right? So perhaps we'll do a part 2 at some point, especially as we start to see new CSOs, BAAs, OTAs come out, because as we get out of busy season, I'm sure we're going to see a lot more opportunities for innovation come to the forefront. Right now, obviously, traditional contracting, trying to close out those procurement cycles on FY25 funding is far underway and certainly not going to be interrupted. So I'm thinking towards the end of the year, we're going to really start to see some things pop up that are going to be challenging. We're seeing some things around power, supply, environmental. We're starting more construction things I think will be coming up towards the end of the year for base reconstructions. efficiencies. We're seeing a lot around supply chain risk management, opportunities to support consolidation of legacy systems. So lots of opportunities that are going to start really peaking after that October 1 timeframe.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for coming today. We are going to be sending out a survey for follow-up. And I think there's one last question in here. Let me get to that. And before I get to that last question, I did want to mention that there are 2 webinars that are coming up. There's a state and local one, so how to do business in state and local in October. And then there's the accelerator webinar that Angela is leading up in November. So keep an eye out for those on LinkedIn and in your email. One last question. If you don't see your topic in a BAA setting, how to nicely suggest the topic to an agency? Okay, so if you don't see a topic, how can you suggest it?
Solicited proposals. For Homeland Security, DHS S&T, Science and Technology Directorate, has opportunities to submit. And when you submit there, it's typically across all the agencies. Individual sub-agencies like Customs and Border, CBP, they also on their website allow you the opportunity to submit an unsolicited proposal. Department of Defense, you have to go to the agency website, look and see if they receive unsolicited proposals and what their mechanism or method is to receive those. But yes, that is what I would recommend. I'm in the process of submitting several of those right now. I think it's always a good idea to submit an unsolicited proposal as you're in the last kind of final stretch of government spend for that fiscal year and at the beginning of the kickoff for the new fiscal year. So it's top of mind for both pots of funding, if you will. So yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, for giving us questions and livening this up. Remember to keep an eye out for the 2 upcoming webinars. I think understanding how to diversify from just federal and into the SLED market, so your state, local, and education market. It's going to be a great webinar in October. And then we're looking at the November one with the accelerator that Angela's leading up. I think those are going to be really good to sit in on. So if we didn't get to your question or you think of a question later, please send something out either through the survey or reach out directly on the website. But we thank you all for coming. Angela, thank you for your time. I know it is extremely valuable, and but it was fun getting to hear a little bit more about this stuff from you, and we look forward to learning a little bit more in the future.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I look forward to working with everyone.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week. See you soon.
Bye.